Have you been playing Call of Duty Zombies for a long time? And I mean a really long time? Well, so have I, since the first map in fact. So what better use of my time than to go over each Zombies title, including non-Treyarch titles, because hey, they're zombies too. And while going over all these titles, I will actually be discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly of each Zombies game, map, and mode in this series, starting with WAW Zombies, A Brief History. To start off, Zombies was never actually meant to be a mode in the Call of Duty franchise. At the time, Call of Duty games were focused on PvP multiplayer and of course their campaigns, which already brought in a tremendous amount of players. These games were much more grounded than the first-person shooters of the time, such as Doom or Quake or even Team Fortress. However, all of this was about to change with World at War, with a little PvE mode which started out as a simple passion project by developers called, and I must say, a very original title, Zombies. Originally the mode was called Nazi Zombies, but Treyarch decided to step away from that label for all future entries and remasters going forward. But yeah, Zombies. Wow, that is just perfect, isn't it? A fair amount of developers were working on this mode in secret and on the sidelines, without the company even knowing about it. A developer named Max Porter created the iconic ray gun, and is the reason why the pack-punch version of the gun is called the Porter's ray gun. Just a little fun fact for you. During this stage in the mode's development, the team were taking inspiration from Nazi Germany during World War II, as the first couple of entries in the series would run with this concept before getting a little bit more fantastical and Lovecraftian in their aesthetics and plot devices. Eventually, after the ray gun's creation and the mystery box were brought into the game, which are arguably the most important iconographies in the Zombies mode, Call of Duty Zombies was born. And Call of Duty, well, that would never be the same again. Although you couldn't just play the Zombies mode off the bat in World at War, oh no. Well, not at first anyways. Originally, you would need to complete the campaign, and then you would load into a barren building with a mere pistol and a couple of grenades, as well as a small tally of round 1 appearing on your screen. Slowly, the undead would break down the barricades, and you'd be consumed by the undead horde, and the game would be over. Nowadays, you can instantly just hop into a match of zombies whenever you'd like, and that's even if you're still playing World at War anymore. But it all started with Nacht Der Untoten, translating to Night of the Dead. A relatively bare-bones experience because, hey, it was the first map after all, so credit where credit is due. In Nacht Der Untoten, you are tasked to survive with little to no aid. You can attain a couple of good weapons from the mystery box sitting in the room opposite the spawn. However, you may also get something way better, the ray gun, which is the most iconic weapon in Call of Duty Zombies history. The ray gun was invented by German scientists to help the aid of Germany during World War II, in this fictional timeline anyway. Although a lot of German experiments did actually inspire the earlier Zombies titles, especially World at War through to Black Ops 1. Apart from these small fantastical elements incorporated into this map, including the Zombies lore, the aim of this map was just to survive for as long as you could without succumbing to the hordes. On solo matches, you only had 1 life, whereas in multiplayer you could revive your teammates, ensuring that they didn't die, and therefore allowing them to retain their weapons after death. Otherwise, you would just bleed out and lose all of your guns. Nacht Der Untoten really paved the way for all of the Zombies entries to date, adding elements of horror into a game primarily focused on PvP. Zombies is a mode that has lasted to this day, and it's only going to get better with the next map to feature in World at War. Vurrückt. Vurruckt was the second Zombies map, set in a creepy, abandoned medical facility with the sounds of bone saws and screaming echoing each and every hallway you set foot in, and it really sheds a light on what Group 935 were getting up to during World War II. That being experimenting on innocent people and enemy soldiers to create an undead army to take on the rest of the world. Ultimately to have complete world domination with an undead army to command thanks to 115. That being the element that controls the zombies. Vurrückt also changes the status quo for zombies with something only attempted by one other map, splitting the players apart from one another. 2 separate rooms leading to 2 different pathways to achieve one specific goal: the power. The power box was introduced in this map, giving the players an incentive to always aim to activate that switch, as Vurrückt also comes with a whole new set of tools and tricks to give the player, allowing them to stand a better chance at survival against the zombies. Traps are the first notable addition to the zombies mode, and would be a staple of the series from this point onwards. Traps are, well, as self-descriptive as they can be. For a small fee, the player can activate an electrical doorway, killing all enemies that walk through it indefinitely, even though the trap only stays on for a limited amount of time before needing to cool down, and then it can be used once again. These traps incentivize the camping strategy, meaning the player would simply sit in a corner and hold out in one specific location. Although traps are great and all, this is not the main reason why Vurrückt was so influential. Perks were also introduced into the zombies mode through Vurrückt, which could be activated via the power switch as mentioned earlier. Perks, as you may have guessed, give the player some buffed stats for a price. For example, Juggernaut gave the player more health points, meaning that they could take more hits before death. Quick Revive allowed players to revive their teammates faster, and this was before self-reviving was a thing. Double Tap allowed you to fire your gun a lot faster, and Speed Cola increased your reload speed for the player's weapons, meaning that heavier guns were now a lot more viable than before. All of these perks combined kept the zombies mode evolving, and this was Treyarch's first attempt at giving the player more of a reason to aim for higher rounds, as it was now much more of a feasible option. Oh, and did I mention that this was the first map to have a mystery box that moved from its initial location? Something that we would see fleshed out a bit more in the next Zombies map. Vurrückt really started to develop the Zombies mode with baby steps, shall we say, giving the player a better chance of survival, and so that you could possibly get to round 30 before dying. Because bearing in mind, WAW Zombies was not the most polished and optimized experience in the series. But I digress. The next map to release would certainly cement World at War's popularity at the time with the next map. Shi No Numa is not exactly considered to be the best map in World at War, but it certainly introduced some great features for the series. Shi No Numa is set in an overgrown and rotten Japanese research facility, where a mysterious meteorite has landed into the lakes next to the main building. This meteor has morphed the inhabitants of the site into brain-seeking undead that we will find ourselves surrounded by throughout the map. In addition, the player is newly greeted with a cast of characters rather than just generic soldiers being used for each map prior to Shi No Numa. We have Tank Dempsey, a US Marine, Nikolai Belinsky, a former Red Army soldier, Takeo Masaki from the Imperial Army, and Dr. Edward Richthofen, a Nazi scientist, who is not only my personal favourite character because he adds a real sense of whimsicality to the game's darker tone, but also because he's the one character who seems to have an understanding of what's actually going on in this undead swamp. Shi No Numa as a map introduced some core iconography and features that we would see consistently throughout the series. The new boss round was introduced, featuring the Hellhounds, and this new boss enemies were zombified dogs surrounded by a blaze of fire. These Hellhounds would not have your conventional spawn points either, like zombies do. Instead, they would teleport into the map at a random location, meaning that you could hear them spawn without seeing them spawn, as claps of thunder start echoing through your TV. This mini-boss would have an entire round dedicated to it as well, rewarding the player by completing the round with a max ammo. And that is always very welcome. Perks would also be spiced up a little bit for this map, much like the mystery box was in Vurruckt. Instead of all the perks being in one consistent location like we saw in Vurruckt, Perks would have specific locations, however they would not be consistent in which perk you would get. Going to the doctor's quarters for example and getting Juggernog in one match, and then starting a new game would not guarantee Juggernog to be in that same location. This encouraged players to fully explore the map, without leaving a certain door shut for any specific strategy. The entire map was and had to be open to allow the player to attain all that it has to offer. By this point, we had all had our turn using the ray gun, and at this point the community wanted to see something more intricate and cool with their wonder weapons. Well, we were in luck. Shi No Numa introduced the WAW DG2, created by Richthofen to aid in the German fight during World War II. This weapon was unique as it fired one shot which could chain kill multiple enemies at once, meaning it was a great weapon for crowd control and getting out of tight spots. Although if fired too close to yourself, you would start taking some damage. Oh, and Shi No Numa was also the first map to have transportation of any kind, with the zipline, which would move you from the doctor's quarters to the main spawn building and vice versa. I just kind of wish that they had ziplines going from all corners of the map, but what can you do? Shi No Numa really started to develop the ideas and gameplay mechanics introduced in previous maps, as this was the first map to actually allow you to explore outside of a building. It is clear that getting to round 100 with the same enemy types was getting boring, especially in such confined spaces, and so the devs at Treyarch introduced the Hellhounds to mix things up a bit, adding a bit more variety in enemy types, which would be greatly explored in future titles. Now let's be honest, I know that Shi No Numa is not everyone's favourite map, and to be honest it's probably most likely not in people's top 10 zombies maps either. But you can't forget what it was doing, developing the mode. And yet, it was the next map that really evolved the mode, and in turn created the final basic blueprint for the zombies mode as we know today.
Side effect, Russia. Everything is normal. Let's get this done.
Riese. Riese is a World at War fan favourite map, generally speaking. Riese is set in a Nazi research facility, a place that Richthofen knows all too well, as some audio tapes hint towards the events preceding this map, as well as the creation of the Hellhounds. This map added a lot more lore into the franchise, which helped flesh out the characters we played as in the previous map, Shi No Numa. However, it did not actually add a lot of new features to the mode, apart from maybe one or two big things. The WAW and Hellhounds are in this map, which were introduced in Shi No Numa. There were traps and perks which were introduced in Vurrückt, and there's nothing taken from Nacht Der Untoten because that map is as bare bones as it comes, and was more of a proof of concept more than anything else. Saying that, some key features were introduced in this map. First of all, we have the teleporters. There are 3 teleporters around the map which the player will have to link back to the main spawn area. There is a time limit when linking each teleporter, meaning that the player will have to rush back towards the spawn just in time, otherwise they will have to relink the teleporter again, although there is no repercussions for failing to link them. Upon being linked, the player will receive a random power drop, such as an insta-kill, a carpenter, a max ammo, or a double points. And upon linking all of the teleporters, the player is also granted a lot more power, meaning high rounds are much more achievable. And that power was the Pack-a-Punch. This mechanic allowed players to put their weapon into the machine for the low price of 5,000 points. But in return, the player would get a much better damage output compared to its unpack-punched variant. This kept players engaged in the mode just a little bit more, allowing the player to become actively more powerful throughout the rounds, rather than making the player feel weaker the longer that they played. And in essence, Riese is very similar to Shi No Numa, with its multiple branching pathways returning back to the main spawn area. But apart from that, and the return of the Hellhounds, which appear now in between regular rounds as you progress further through the game, Riese doesn't really have that much more to offer. On the other hand, this is the map where the mode fully fell into place, figuring out all of its mechanics through every other map to culminate in a solid and replayable zombies experience, and create a blueprint for the zombies mode. And that was all founded in Riese. World at War Zombies was the birthplace for an amazing future for the Call of Duty franchise. No longer were players stuck in a realistic shooter or a realistic campaign. Instead, players were able to explore more of a fantastical element with the series. The Zombies mode was a real break from the standard PvP modes that encouraged players to work together to survive as long as possible. Well, that is, unless you have the ray gun, then your friends will just let you bleed out so they can get the ray gun. The Zombies mode has its inception during World at War as a fun reward for completing the campaign. It would go on to spark so many sequels and spin-offs from other Activision developers, with Advanced Warfare, Infinite Warfare, World War II, and Vanguard. But we both know where it all began, in an abandoned airfield, somewhere in Germany. And so that wraps up a brief history of World at War Zombies. I hope you did enjoy, and please let me know if you want to see a sequel with Black Ops 1 Zombies: A Brief History by clicking that like button and subscribing. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.